The Eversolo DAC Z10 is a logical step-up option for audiophiles building their systems beyond, say, the $5,000 level. At $5,000, plus or minus a bit, you probably spend $1,000 on a streamer and DAC, $1,500 to $2,500 on amplification, and $1,500 to $2,500 on speakers. You might balance this differently, but you just don't have the budget for a $1,400 streamer and a $2,000 DAC, which is what the two Eversolo products we're looking at cost at review time. If, however, you're just working on upgrades or straight up buying a system around $10,000 or maybe a bit more, these products might fit nicely. Let's see what they offer. I'll start with the DAC Z10 because I think that will be of most interest. I do caution, though, that streamers make a significant sonic contribution, so I urge you to stay tuned for that section. But the Z10 and T8 are separate boxes and need not be used together, although there's reason to do so, as we will see. All right, we'll start with the DAC Z10 features. I don't usually spend too much time here basically reading the internet to you. But in the case of the DAC Z10, the feature set and its execution are noteworthy, so I'll highlight features that I think relate to sound quality at some level. Some detail is required. Sorry. To get right down to it, the DAC Z10 incorporates a resistive ladder volume control, not to be confused with a ladder DAC design, which the Z10 is not. The R2R volume control is important for several reasons. First, by avoiding volume control in the digital domain, Eversolo avoids the possibility of bit truncation and attendant sonic damage. There are digital approaches to addressing this issue as well, like lead, we should note. And of course, analog circuits can have distortion too, and maybe more, but a relay-driven resistive ladder is thought by many engineers to be the best solution. And that's what Eversolo uses here. I haven't seen this approach on other lower-priced DACs that I've had on test. That isn't the end of the story, however. Because the DAC Z10 has a good volume control, it's an easier decision for audiophiles to skip having a separate preamp. Note that the Z10 effectively can replace a preamp for another reason, which is that it has two analog inputs with 10 dB of gain, which is sufficient if you want to run a phono preamp into them. And the Z10 has multiple digital inputs, including eARC. Since the Z10 has more than sufficient output voltage, 2.5 volts, to drive power amps to clipping, you don't need the extra gain stage of a preamp. So we've avoided an extra analog amplification stage, potentially, and thereby reduced noise and distortion if the DAC analog section is good. Now, lower-priced DACs generally have volume controls, but these are often implemented purely in software. Several downsides emerge from a pure software approach. The biggest one, in my experience, is that the control precision of on-screen volume control is simply lower. You're often adjusting a slider that's only a few inches long with a finger that's 15 to 25% of the width of the whole slider. You can tap plus or minus on the screen, but that's a glitchy experience at times, and the whole thing depends on the capacitance of your skin, which varies with humidity. The on-screen volume control also may involve the distraction of needing to wake up the control device, the phone or the iPad, and sometimes then bring the volume control up from a hidden position. And once you do, you have to look carefully at the screen because there's no haptic feedback. Now, you can use a phone, and your music app may allow the phone hardware controls, usually on the side of the phone, to adjust the volume, but that isn't a given, and there are issues with those controls as well. I go into detail here because analytically, on-screen volume control is just a bad user interface, yet it's become accepted because it's low cost and prevalent. The volume adjustment is easily the most common interaction you have with your system, so this is hardly a neurotic concern. Even more, I focus on volume control for a bigger reason. Volume control is a sound quality factor. This seems to have been forgotten in a past era when analog volume controls ruled. But with on-screen volume controls, you lose precision of adjustment. Also, anytime a control is semi-difficult to use, you'll use it less. Now, to be clear, volume control is an SQ factor because of the combination of several realities. First, different recordings have different average levels. Different recordings have different dynamic range profiles. Different systems work better or worse at different average and peak levels. Different ambient noise levels have different masking effects. Your ear responds badly to levels that are too high. My experience is that there tends to be a right level for each recording or track. Plus or minus 1 dB might not matter, but a change greater than that, and you may find the sound gets dead or unpleasant. Spatial performance degrades or improves as well, depending. Maybe that's too much information, but from the perspective of $1,000 chip DACs, the DAC Z10 carries a premium price. I would consider the R2R volume control implementation alone to be worth it, budget limitations notwithstanding, especially because the Z10 includes a very nice physical remote for volume. No waking up, no menu layers, buttons can be found by touch, fine-grained adjustments are made easy. Why suffer? Okay, enough on that. The DAC Z10 also has a large 9-inch front panel display for indicating the input-output configuration. This same display can be used to show meters or dynamics by frequency if you like such things. And the display can be set to deliver a large numeric volume readout, which is nice for calibrating where volume is set. I know, I probably sound obsessed. Finally, the DAC Z10 has a few distinctive circuit concepts. The main DAC chips are from AKM. The first key chip is the AK4191. The 4191 is a hybrid digital filter and delta sigma modulator that handles all digital signal processing, oversampling, digital filtering, delta sigma modulation, noise shaping. Perhaps the key innovation is that all digital switching noise and processing happens in this separate 4191 chip away from the analog stages. Then we have the AK4499EX DAC. The AK4499EX receives the pre-modulated bit stream and focuses purely on analog conversion. That means low-pass filtering. It converts the high-frequency modulated stream back to analog. Current to voltage conversion. The DAC outputs current, which gets converted to voltage. Differential output. It provides balanced outputs with extremely low distortion. And an OSR doubler. Can further double the oversampling ratio for reduced noise. In addition, as with many chip DACs, the Z10 offers a range of interpolation filters for the AK4191 that you can select. Linear phase and minimum phase, fast and slow roll-offs, for example. Such filters affect pre-ringing or the lack of it and other signal qualities. It is, to some degree, the case that digital filters on average have the same distortion levels, but most listeners will prefer some settings to others because music, especially your music, isn't a mathematically average signal. The ability to adjust the filters in real time with the remote is nice for initial setup. In this case, I ended up using linear phased fast roll-off the most, but your mileage may vary. You can, of course, choose those by recording, although I have to say I find that distracting. The filters are selectable via remote from the listening position, making filter changes about as easy as could be. Note that the models of chips are one thing and implementation is another. Eversolo seems to have paid great attention to such things as clocking, power supplies, but proof of that will be in the listening, or not. One last thing. The DAC Z10 has an I2S input. I'll cover that when we get to the T8 streamer discussion because to use the Z10 with I2S, you need to have a streamer or other device with an I2S output, which the T8 provides. Okay, now we get to the real deal. Sound quality. While my comments on features mainly relate to those that affect SQ, let's get down to direct, objective observation of sound quality variables. As a reminder, we observe how components being tested perform relative to a reference, which we call the absolute sound. This is simply the sound of real instruments and voices in real space. This reference gives us a basis for identifying component distortions of all kinds, not just harmonic distortion. Every component has distortions, so your job with these reviews is to estimate how the distortion profile of a given component suits your needs, your system, your music, and so on. There's much more on our methodology via a link in the description. As always, I start with exceptional qualities. First, let's talk about clarity. The DAC Z10 has a very good sense of clarity. Instruments are well separated from each other, and details are abundant. While you may think of clarity as a hallmark of digital, listening to a slew of DACs reveals that there's clarity and then there's clarity. The Z10 competes with DACs at 2 to 3 times the price on this score, something I can't say about the DACs I've tried below this level. The Z10, for example, nicely unpacks the Boston Symphony playing the Shostakovich 11th under Nelson's on DG. You can hear into this performance in an engaging way. Izzy Escobar's recent pop release, Sunny in London, is similarly transparent and detailed for another kind of music for this test. Second, fine-grained signal. For the most part, the clarity of the Z10 is enhanced by the fine-grained delivery of musical tones. You are, at least subconsciously, made aware that the music is not quite believable if you hear texture that's unlike the instrument or the voice itself would have. Now, I don't think the Z10 is equal on this parameter to the DACs at 2 times or 5 times the price, but it's quite good, and I think gains from here are rather subtle, whereas I would say the gains of the Z10 over lower price devices are more significant, though still subtle. That subtlety index might just be me, and certainly depends on your musical repertoire. French Baroque violins and death metal depend on different things for believability. Next, we have imaging. The fine grain of the Z10 suggests good low-level signal handling. That capability is perhaps even more noticeable when it comes to imaging, sound stage, and sound space. The Z10 is very good here. It should be irrelevant to most people, but at 10 times the price, there's imaging performance that is not just technically more betterer, but also distinctly believable. But the Z10 is so good here, and you need such a refined and expensive system to benefit from the higher-end approach, that I think the Z10 gives you what you need and probably want. Juliana Barwick and Mary Lattimore's ambient Tragic Magic has excellent depth and sound space. Another example, Mon Laferte's Femme Fatale reveals a very good sense of stage positioning. You want both. Then we come to good transient behavior. The Z10 delivers well-controlled and engaging transients, especially in the difficult treble region. Cymbals on Vijay Iyer's Uneasy have a natural, detailed, and unpacked quality. The microdynamics on Lantidote's self-titled album are similarly extended, but not overwrought. Okay, now, everyone seems to like this section, so I want to do sort of extended dance mix here, and that section is voicing. This is an area that's really only a strength or weakness in context. The Z10 pretty consistently shines a mild spotlight on high frequencies and mid-bass. Now, if we measure the Z10, we'll find that the frequency response is ruler flat, but the transient performance and distortion profile will vary with frequency. With DACs, unlike speakers, when we talk about voicing, we're really talking about how these elements, not standard frequency response, affect the sound. A lot of audio phenomena happen in the time domain, but are perceived elsewhere. Imaging is a great example. The net is that the Z10 casts a bit of extra attention on treble from perhaps 3K up. I heard this on many of the albums I just referenced, but the Shostakovich 11th is one example, and Anna Ganesheni's piano on Opus 1 make the voicing particularly evident. And the Z10 draws attention to bass in the 60 to 120 Hz region, just slightly. On Thomas Stronin's Relations, a bass test disc of sorts despite being modern small ensemble jazz, you hear a bit of extra thickness in the drums. Overall, I think you could say that the treble sounds crystalline and highly refined, and you could say that the bass sounds warm and natural. You could also say that the mid-range is ever so slightly withdrawn. For most listeners, these subtleties will be masked by other factors like speaker response and room. But you may know the direction in which you're tuning your system, so this information might help. On that subject, the magnitude of the differences between DACs should be part of your thinking. The differences, as I hope I've indicated, are subtle. I've used the word, 50 times? I think they're also important, but not in the way that some audiophiles may be focused on. Some will be interested in changes to their systems that can render wholesale transformations, changing the sound dramatically, as for example when you switch from cone speakers to planars. That simply isn't what DACs do. But DACs affect the core quality of the music you hear, and so can be important to incremental progress. DACs are sort of like cooking or seasoning. You can't cook a ribeye in a way that makes it lasagna. You can't season it to make it lasagna either. But the level of cooking and salt and pepper will matter to you nonetheless, especially if your goal was to eat a good steak rather than a tasteless one. Okay, let's move on to the T8 streamer. I used the DAC Z10 initially with my Orander N20 streamer. This is mainly to avoid changing too many variables at once when we do a test. Really, you'd like to change one at a time. But I think it's unrealistic to imagine many buyers of the Z10 also buying a $14,000 streamer, although good streamers can make a surprising difference with good DACs. The Eversolo T8 streamer costs $1,400, which seems more likely to fit with the budget of the Z10 buyer. Despite the price, the T8 has some interesting features. From a pure SQ standpoint, the big ones are SFP fiber optic network input connection and I2S connection from the T8 to the Z10, or to any DAC that'll accept an I2S input. It also supports USB or AES EBU or SPDIF output to the DAC. There's onboard room correction and parametric EQ also available. For music playback, the T8 supports Tidal and Qobuz and many other services. It's also Roon ready and supports Tidal Connect and Qobuz Connect, JPlay, DLNA, and UPnP control software. It supports PCM 32-bit 768K and DSD 512 files. Consistent with my preference for limiting variables, I started with the USB output of the T8, running to the USB input of the Z10, just as I was using with the Orander. A quick summary of the impact of the T8 substituted for my Orander N20 is that the basic qualities of the Z10 are preserved, but they're tweaked a bit when using the T8. The two big differences are treble transients, especially on less well-made recordings, have a bit more edge with the T8, and sound staging is slightly flatter with the T8, with a little less depth and a bit less layering of performer positioning. I'll add that dynamic performance, noted above as a strength, was not only preserved, but it seems slightly enhanced. Similarly, the fine-grained element of the performance was slightly diminished at times with the T8. Again, these differences are subtle, but in keeping with my note on the importance of streamers, they're of similar magnitude to the differences between DACs in similar price ranges, within maybe 2 to 1. Next, I went on to try the I2S input-output configuration. Some think this is a big deal, so of course I wanted to see if it was in this specific application. Before we cover SQ matters, I should note that the T8 and Z10 provide 8 different choices of I2S signal pinout options in an effort to ensure cross-compatibility for the I2S, which is non-standardized. Well, anyway, I'm glad our viewers weren't on hand to form a betting pool around this question, because I would have bet that the I2S would make something between 0 and an occasional difference. But wouldn't you know, that's not how things happen. To summarize, the I2S input-output configuration erases about 90% of the difference between the Orander feeding the Z10 with USB and the T8 feeding the Z10 with USB. Soundstage layering is still better with the Orander USB combination, but dynamics seems slightly better with the T8 using I2S. Apropos my earlier comments, I think the treble voicing picture I drew with the Orander and Z10 is slightly amplified with the T8 and I2S into the Z10, but I noticed the change in dynamics more. Note that this connection of voicing and dynamics is something we've seen before. A semi-technical comment is in order here. The basic advantage of I2S is that the clock and the data are on separate channels and thus may be easier to keep synced. With USB, the DAC must extract and reconstruct the clock. This can be done, but requires good implementation in the DAC. Of course, clocking responsibility just moves. With I2S, the streamer has to have clock stability, so implementation matters there. Eversolo does have a floating point gate array in the Z10 specifically to improve the timing of the I2S signal, which might be especially valuable with a less well-clocked streamer. Also, I wouldn't take my observations to signal any general evaluation of I2S versus USB, but rather to articulate specifically what happens with this streamer and this DAC. All right, I want to add some important thoughts. I should note that the execution of these Eversolo products is top-notch in the context of high-end audio. I've commented on volume controls, but the displays, their size, the fluidity of both touch and remote operation, the ease of setup, the quality of the aluminum cabinet construction, the packaging, literally everything seemed thoughtfully prepared, tested, and useful. Other audio manufacturers should study what Eversolo is doing. Eversolo aren't the only ones, but the bar has definitely been raised. All right, let me summarize. I hope obviously, impressed with both the Eversolo DAC Z10 and the T8 streamer. The sound takes an important step forward from products at half the price. The user interface is superior. The connectivity is excellent. As I said, impressive, deeply impressive. I hope you've enjoyed this review of the Eversolo DAC Z10 and T8 streamer. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you again soon.